também de quem está nos assistindo pela internet, né? A palestra ela vai ser realizada em inglês. Bem, então eu vou reintroduzir a palestra brevemente, né? A gente está organizando aqui essa palestra pelo Núcleo de Estudos Internacionais, com o título A Guerra da Ucrânia, situação atual e a questão dos direitos humanos. Meu nome é Ivan Fernandes, eu sou professor de Políticas Públicas da Universidade Federal do ABC. Agradeço aí a presença de todos que estão aqui presencialmente, também aqueles que nos assistem pelo YouTube, né? Gostaria de agradecer os professores convidados, Aline Eliev e Pedro Burkowski, e agradeço, sobretudo, a participação de Caio Favaretto, quem é o responsável pela realização deste evento. Caio Favaretto, ele é advogado, professor, presidente da Comissão de Advocacia Criminal da OAB de São Paulo, tem atuado em temas de inteligência política e cenários de crise sob a perspectiva internacional. Agradeço novamente a participação de todos, né, e passo a palavra para o Caio. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Ivan, um querido colega dos tempos de graduação. Queria agradecer também a presença aqui de todas e todos, bom dia. Queria seguir agradecendo também a hospitalidade do SEBRAP, essa casa tão importante para São Paulo e para o Brasil, na pessoa da professora Maria Hermínia, né, que infelizmente não pôde acompanhar os debates hoje. As duas falas dos nossos dois especialistas hoje vão se estender por algo em torno de 15 minutos cada uma, depois das quais a gente vai abrir um espaço para perguntas, intervenções das pessoas que nos acompanham aqui no auditório e também das pessoas que nos acompanham ao vivo pelo YouTube. So Alim and Petro, I'd like to thank you again for being in Brazil. I'll present your brief CVs on Portuguese so everyone can understand. Alim Aliev é vice-diretor-geral do Instituto Ucraniano, uma organização pública que promove o conhecimento sobre a Ucrânia internacionalmente e desenvolve relações entre a Ucrânia e outros países usando as ferramentas da diplomacia pública e cultural. É jornalista, ativista de direitos humanos, curador de projetos educacionais, culturais e pesquisador. É cofundador da Crimea SOS, uma ONG que trabalha para contribuir com a desocupação da Crimeia e sua reintegração ao território ucraniano. É membro da diretoria da PEN Ukraine, uma ONG criada para proteger a liberdade de expressão e os direitos de autores também. O seu trabalho se concentra principalmente na prevenção da opressão ao povo tártaro na Crimeia e na preservação da sua identidade. Muito obrigado, Alim. Petro Burkowski é diretor executivo da Yuko Kucherev Democratic Initiative Foundation, que é um think tank ucraniano com sede em Kiev. Antes de entrar no DIF, o Petro trabalhou por 14 anos no Instituto Nacional de Estudos Estratégicos como chefe do Centro de Estudos Avançados sobre a Rússia, onde ocupou cargos de chefe de Departamento de Desenvolvimento do Sistema Políticos, foi vice-chefe do Departamento de Análise, Departamento de Informação, consultor-chefe, entre outras áreas. A sua área de especialização é a História, Análise Comparativa, Direito Constitucional, Processo Decisório, Política de Segurança, Política Energética e de Relações Internacionais. Então é isso, agradeço. Vocês têm a palavra. You have the word, Petro, if you'd like to begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Olá, muito obrigada, dear partners, dear friends. We are very honored to be on the land of Brazil and to have this wonderful opportunity to speak to the people of Brazil, to the intellectuals, professors, to all people of the goodwill who are interested in the international relations, who are interested in the global issues, who are in the global issues like peace, the multilateralism, in the peaceful solution of the conflicts, and all the people of the goodwill who think that the differences among the countries should be resolved in a peaceful manner, and the democratic countries all over the world should be together in order to withstand the global issues and the threats of rising authoritarianism, rising unilateralism. So here we are as the representatives of the country, which is the founding. Just let me to give very basic facts about Ukraine. Ukraine was the founding country of the United Nations in 1945. Ukraine was also, in the beginning of its independence in 1991, Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, right after the Russia and the United States, but it decided to give up its nuclear arms in return for the security guarantees. And that was one of the biggest contribution of the Ukrainian people to the global stability, because we do think as a peaceful nation, as a nation that struggled for independence for 500 years and who finally won this independence in 1991, that not the weapons, not the coercion, but the agreement, development, and trade and the dialogue can build a better world. So therefore, if the world wants to survive in the next decades and centuries, the nuclear arms and the all other disastrous means of destruction which are now used against our country, against our people, should be prohibited, and the military alliances should be disbanded. But as we fight for our independence and for our sovereignty, let me then describe and give you also a little presentation of the current situation, and to give maybe several points on how Ukraine is similar to Brazil and how Ukraine is different. My first point here, and I will refer to the presentation. I have several slides prepared, just very few. I will not exhaust you with the figures and the tables, but just a few facts that Ukraine, as a Brazil, as a maturing democracy, not without flaws. No, there are no flawless democracies in the world, so nobody can teach neither Ukraine, nor Brazil, nor any other country for the democratic standards. But it's a maturing democracy. And on the table, on the screen, which I think you can also see through the internet right now, you can see how the Ukrainians responded to the question, what is the best type of the government and what is the best type of regime for Ukraine. And you can see that since 2004 until the August 2022, the number of people who think that democracy is the best government for Ukraine, it's really increased. Despite the ups and downs of the global economy, despite the crises like financial crisis, and even despite the Russian aggression, when the nation consolidated and when we had to impose the martial law since February 2022, but still most of the Ukrainians think and remain very determined that it's a democracy which is the best way to organize the life of the people inside the country, and only democracy provides a responsible way for the foreign policy. So this is my first topic. Secondly, the Ukraine as a Brazil is looking for the ways to integrate peacefully for the sake of peace, security, and trade cooperation with its neighbors. Like Brazil, which is a crucial and a pivotal member of Mercosur, and who made a lot of trade agreements. The same is about Ukraine. So since even before 2014, even before the Russia started its war in 2014, Ukrainians were in favor of the European integration. And also I need to remind that even before 2014, the official line of Russian Federation was also is that they wanted to be a part of the Europe. But in 2012, 2014, something changed in Russia. They decided that it's better to use coercion and the force and not the dialogue and reconciliation with the neighbors. But they are living on their own. We are living on our own. Ukraine, you can see from this slide, from this charter, these are the results of our opinion polls, which we conducted on a regular basis as a Democratic Initiatives Foundation. And you can see that the will to join the European Union, which is a peaceful trade bloc, which is a peaceful common market, only increases with the time, while the other attitudes, they are in decline. And finally, the third point. Let me just tell you that for many times we hear that the war between Ukraine and Russia is just a proxy war between the West, the United States, and Russia, and that this war was provoked by the intention of NATO to extend into Eastern Europe to threaten Russian security, and that Ukraine was just a pawn. The truth is that, first of all, before Russia invaded Ukraine, Ukrainians did not want to join NATO at all. And you can see it from this slide. In 2012, it was less than 15% of the Ukrainian populations who thought that the best way, the best option for the national security is to join NATO. Guarantee peace and security for the country is to be neutral and non-bloc. And moreover, in 2010, the Ukrainian parliament adopted legislation which made Ukraine effectively a neutral and non-bloc country. Regardless to this, Russia, for the sake of the territory, for the sake of coercion, invaded Ukraine, occupied Crimea, and from this moment, the opinion of the Ukrainian people started to change dramatically. And you can see it from this slide, that the number of people who wanted, who believed that the best way for Ukrainian security is a NATO membership, it increased from 15% in 2012 to 45% in September 2014. And after that, it became even stronger. Right now, you can see the last point. It was the August of 2022. It was the 51% of Ukrainians who thought that the best way to guarantee security is to join NATO. That was made ultimately by the Russian aggression and by Russian attempt to limit, circumvent, and even to destroy the Ukrainian sovereignty. So that was the public response. If we talk about the current situation, let me just also, there are a lot of discussion in the media, in the world media, that Ukraine should look for the ways to stop the war, maybe to make concessions, compromises with Russia. But since Ukraine is a democratic country, the last word is also for the people. And here you can see the table from the poll which we conducted in June this year. And the people were allowed a number of statements, whether to agree or disagree. So in June 2023, regardless to the fact that the war has continued for almost 18 months, majority of the Ukrainians, like 53%, that they said that they would rather to continue the war, to continue struggle and to fight back the Russian aggression, but and majority were not in favor of for the peace at any price, which means that Ukraine would cease to exist as a sovereign and democratic country and become a satellite country for Russia. If you want to compare in the history of the Latin America, that was like the Cuba was the satellite country first to the Spain and then to the United States. So that was not, so the Ukrainian people are directly against this kind of scenario for the future of them and of their children. And people also, on this slide you can see that people also reject all kind of demands that are imposed to Russia or presented by Russia, whether it's to refuse to join NATO. 74% reject this kind of Russian demand. Reducing size of the armed forces in the future, 80% reject. To give up territories, this is the most unpopular demand, or the most unpopular concession. 90% of Ukrainians voluntarily said that these kind of concessions are unacceptable. And of course, for many times you can hear that there is an issue of Russian language in Ukraine, and Russia very often demand that the Russian language should become the second language. It is rejected by the 75% of Ukrainians, because the language, and I think Alim will tell more in his part, is the crucial for the national identity, for preserving and for development of the national identity, and no foreign power can have any kind of upper hand in the issues of imposing its will on whether Ukrainians will speak English or Russian or German or some other language except their own native language. What I also want to share with you and to give you understanding of the current Ukrainian society. The fact is that it's not only the state which fights against the Russian aggression, but it's also people. And here you can see the poll which conducted was in August this year. And we asked the people how do they participated in the struggle against the aggression. And you can see the numbers, that in total, up to 68% of Ukrainians who are civilians, they said that they provided either physical or financial, or both physical and financial assistance to the armed forces, to the internally displaced people who lost their homes due to the Russian bombardment, to the people who were affected by the war physically or mentally. So there is a big level of social cohesion and social consolidation, civilian consolidation in Ukraine. The people, despite the hardships and the economic recession in Ukraine, 68% of the people on a regular basis, they participate, they donate their labor, donate their time, donate their money to help country to withstand against this aggression. And it shows that Ukraine has a very big share of resilience and strengths to continue to fight for its independence, and people are not ready to make any kind of concessions and to become a satellite state of Russia. And finally, let me end my speech with the very positive news about Brazil and about all the countries of the world. So here you can see the poll conducted by our Canadian partner, the GlobeScan company, and they in the 30 countries all over the world, they asked the question and they allowed the respondents to agree or disagree whether their governments should support Ukraine. And 69%, it's an average. If we took all the 30 countries, they either strongly agree or somewhat agree that their government should support Ukraine. And if we look on the next slide, and you can find also Brazil, and in Brazil it's 67%, so almost as the average all over the world. 67% of Brazilians, they either strongly agree or somewhat agree with the statement that Brazilian government should back Ukraine in its struggle for independence. These are very optimistic and very inspiring news for us, because this poll showed in Latin America, in Brazil, all over the world, that Ukraine is not alone, that the Ukrainian struggle is not something remote, but it's a very human struggle to preserve dignity, to preserve freedom, and to preserve the right to decide its own fate, and the right to build a better future for their children. So at this moment, let me conclude and give the floor to other speakers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your presentation and for the astonishing data. And now I send the word to Aline. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Muito obrigado pela apresentação e passo a palavra agora para o professor Aline. Yeah, por favor.
Obrigado. Dear colleagues, thank you to having me here and to talk with you about Ukraine, about situation in Ukraine. I will talk about a few dimensions of the situation. It's a situation with the cultural in Ukraine and human rights situation in occupied territories, and also about indigenous people. Today, this war has personal dimension to each of us. For example, part of my family under Russian occupation in Crimea, another part of my family in forced migration, my cousin in Ukraine army, and I'm in Kiev. We are totally splitted, and the war is not give us the possibility to be together in our land in Crimea. But as Petra mentioned, this war, it's not about the land. This war is about our identity, the vision of future, and it's about our choice of the future, democratic choice of the future. The Russian invasion of Ukraine aims to destroy and deny the independent Ukraine cultural identity, history, language, and heritage in all of the forms. And I can call it is a cultural genocide, and I just give a few examples of it. During only the full-scale invasion from the February 2022, more than 800 facilities destroyed by Russian bombs in Ukraine. I talked about museums, schools, libraries, opera houses, etc., etc., etc. One of the most glaring example is the drama theater in Mariupol that destroyed by Russia bombs in March 2022, and this case, 600 civilians died in Mariupol in this drama theater. One more example, a few months ago I was in Kherson region. It's a southern part of Ukraine, and it was under occupation half year in 2022, and after the occupation of the territory, we mentioned that the Russian occupiers stole only in Kherson museum, a local museum of art, 10,000 of pieces of art. It's near 80% of all of collection of this museum. And such examples we have, unfortunately, in different areas and different occupied territories in Ukraine also. One more I want to talk about violations against artists and violations against journalists. It was this year. It was in June this year. My good friend of mine, Victoria Melina, she was a prominent Ukrainian author, writer, and human rights defender. And she went to the Kramatorsk. It's a small city in the front line in the eastern part of Ukraine with Colombian journalists. She was a fixer for them, and she killed by Russian missile attack during the missile attack. And now during this missile attack, 13 people were killed, and Victoria also. And now it's one of the example how Russia killed our people, not only people in front line, not only Ukraine army, but first of all, civilian people. They launched missiles to hospitals, to schools, to kindergartners, etc., etc., etc. But in the same time, Ukraine culture community demonstrates resilience. During these last 2 years, we have a lot of new examples of creating cultural projects inside Ukraine, in bomb shelters. And we demonstrate this project around the world with theater tours or some music with the music bands. And for us, it's like a case how we can do and how we can show our resilience now for our world, for all of the world. Next, that I want to talk about Crimea. I'm originally from Crimea. I'm a Crimean Tatar. Crimean Tatar is the indigenous people of Ukraine, and my motherland is occupied. But the occupation of Crimea, it was the start of the war in Ukraine in 2014. And today the Crimea became a role model for the occupation to another territories of Ukraine by Russia. And what means the occupation of Crimea? For us, as indigenous people, it's a recolonization of Crimea and Crimean Tatars by Russia. And recolonization has a few dimensions. First dimension, it's military colonization. And today, Crimea is one of the main platforms for Russia to launch missiles to another part of Ukraine. Only during last 1.5 years, 1,000 Russian missiles launched to Ukraine territories from Crimea. But it's also about militarization of consciousness and glorify Russian army and cult of war in Crimea. Second, it's about the identity. Today, strong Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar identity that does not fit into Kremlin Russian ideology is destroyed. I talked about tangible and intangible cultural heritage. I talk about, for example, Crimean Tatar language and our language, one of the vanishing languages according to the UNESCO list. But we have possibilities to learn language in the school. Only 3% of all of the people in Crimea, students of Crimea, can learn this language. That's why we organized in Crimea some, local schools in the home when we can teach the language for our children. Also, we talk about Ukrainian language. Today, we haven't any Ukrainian language school in Crimea. It means that Russia, all of these schools trying to make Russian language schools. And today, the identity, Ukrainian Crimean Tatar identity is only the deal of ourselves. That's why a lot of new grassroots initiatives is launched in Crimea that preserve identity and preserve the topic of human rights as a monitoring the situation with the human rights violations in Crimea. And third, last but not least, it's about population replacement. During the last 9.5 years, more than 70,000 people left Crimea, and it was a brain drain. But we have the reserve trend. 700,000 of Russians moved to Crimea from Russia, and it was a settlement colonization. And during the Crimean history, it's a third attempt to change ethnic and religious comparison in Crimea. For example, I just give two numbers. Before the first annexation of Crimea in 18th century by Catherine II, 95% among the all of population in Crimea were Crimean Tatars. Now it's dropped into 13%. But of course, we believe in our that we will win because it's existential war. And this war about values of democracy, values of dignity, and values of human rights and multiculturalism. I know I'm first time in Brazil, and I mentioned a lot of common things between Ukraine and Brazil. And it's not only about football, music, etc., but it's about preserving the rights of indigenous people and the right of democratic way. Thank you, colleagues.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. So I will pass the word for people that want to make comments and Q&A for the presenters.
Ivan, if I may. So it's been 600 days of conflict now, but as you well described, it's been a conflict that goes back at least to 2014. During the last elections in Brazil, we had major issues concerning fake news, troll farms, and the building of a whole environment of misinformation and disinformation. And we know that Ukraine was maybe the first time that we had this experience globally. And even if the Trump election was for sure an important episode. So if you could both expand a bit on disinformation, misinformation techniques, and the experience you had in Ukraine during the last 10 years. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Akara, for the question. Let me then start with very briefly and on a theoretical framework. So disinformation works on the long term, and it works only when it hits the existing and very serious divisions inside the society. So, for instance, if you have a society which is mono-ethnical, right, which is mono-religious, which has a common vision of history, right? And where majority of the people are satisfied with their current political regime, and in the society, the majority of the young people, this is very important, also believe that the future of their life is also tied to this country. I tell you, as a social scientist, it's impossible, or it's very difficult to create or to subvert this society, to confuse the people by means of disinformation. So first of all, there should be a very serious internal conflicts in the society. Secondly, even if, but there is a second story. Even if the society is cohesive, but if you start trying and do it in a long term, gradually, with using sophisticated methods of creating fake news, disseminating propaganda together with the facts, so mixing the facts and the non-existent statements, then in the long term you can persuade people, right, in very wild things. For instance, you can persuade people that vaccines are hurting more than diseases, right? But it takes time to convert people in the new belief. You can make people think that invading a neighboring country, by invading neighboring country, you will make a benefit to this country, not the suffering. So, but it takes time. And let me just give you an example of our closest neighbor, which is Russia. So Russia did not become the kind of state that exists right now in a moment. It took almost 20 years for Russian President Vladimir Putin to dilute the sense of democracy in the country and to make people believe that democracy is a bad thing, that it only undermines the fundamentals of the Russian state, that the state should be governed with the strong iron hand, that the state should redistribute wealth among people, not the mechanisms of economy. So it really, even in the society which was post-communist, even a post-communist society, it took almost, let's say, at least 15 years for disinformation to work. Then there is a third story that if we took disinformation which was regarding to the military operations. So this disinformation works in a very specific conditions. And what are the goals of the disinformation? So first of all, the first goal is to undermine public trust in the institutions. Mm-hmm. So before you invade the country, before Russians invaded Ukraine in 2014, what they tried to do is they tried to persuade as many people in Ukraine as possible that Ukrainian state institutions are not working, mm-hmm. that they are dysfunctional and they cannot deliver the basic services to the people. So in a way, when the country is invaded, the people see no point in protecting these institutions because they think that even under occupation, their life won't change. So this is you should be very careful in any democratic country. So when you see that the narrative, the dominant narrative, is about that the parliament is a bad thing, that the politicians in the parliament just talk and do nothing, that the executive branch, that it is corrupted, it's just infiltrated and completely captured by the corrupted politicians that think only about their own benefit. So then you see the first early warning signs that somebody inside your country or from outside of your country is undermining the basic public trust in the state institutions. In order and how to uncover this, you should explain people that without state institutions, nothing will work, that there will be no stability of the national currency, the basic social services would not be delivered if people do not support the state and the public institutions. So secondly, how disinformation works. It looks at the differences in the societies, like differences between poor and rich. If we take like a federal countries, like countries with the federal government system, the differences between different entities, different, let's say, regions, so that some regions are feeding the country, or some other regions are free riders on a federal system. So if you see this kind of narrative, you should, these are also early warning signs that somebody is trying to dilute the trust into the federal system as the system of government, or a system of the government. And these are also the signs of disinformation. And finally, very important thing. You mentioned, Kayo, you mentioned the elections. So first of all, the early warning sign that you are under influence of the disinformation campaign is when you hear that elections are going to get rigged, that elections will be falsified, that in any case that not the people who vote decide the outcome of elections, but the people who count votes. But if you know that in your country you have courts, you have strong political parties who send their observers to observe the elections. If you have a strong legislation and which prohibits and which punishes the attempts to falsify the elections, then you should be also well aware that you are facing a formidable disinformation campaign. The goal of disinformation campaign is to persuade people that elections doesn't matter, they doesn't work, and that the result of the elections are decided in some other way. And what does it mean? The people are disappointed, and the major result is to decrease the turnout during the elections and to bring to the elections only those people who are detached from the state. For instance, people who think that that there should be more social welfare, or people who think that the police should be more more coercive toward the criminals, or the people who think that, for instance, if you speak about the foreign policy, that some countries should join this economic union but not that economic union. So people who are who have either extremist views or who are true believers, who have like a religious faith, and they believe in the values regardless to the facts. So if only these people come to the elections, not the moderates, then elections really can transform into very tense and even violent competitions. And this is the goal of the disinformation, to turn elections from the fair competition into almost a civil war, because as a result it will weaken the state, weaken the society, and make it very susceptible and vulnerable to the external influences. So these are the lessons that we learned for the last 15 years, because we all witnessed how the Russia did all the things I mentioned in order to decrease the public resilience and will to resist. However, in case of Ukraine, that has not worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Petro gives very good review how it works in Ukraine now, and I just give a few examples about disinformation and about stereotypes and myths. Of course, the war is increased the disinformation against Ukraine from the Russian side, and one of the narrative, for example, that comes from 2014, that the Crimea is a Russian land, yeah, ancient Russian land, and when people talks about it, then don't understand that before 18th century, any Russians lives in Crimea. In Crimea lives a lot of people, a lot of nations, but only after the Crimean annexation by Catherine II, Russia and Russian presence was really huge in Crimea. And today, Crimean Tatars interfere for these myths of Crimean Russian. Yeah, that's why they have this mechanism of repressions against Crimean Tatars. Another, it's about appropriation of culture. And today we have a challenge to the stereotype that a lot of cultural names from the cultural side, like paintings, musicians, writers are Russians, attributed as Russians, but a lot of them were Ukrainians, as for example, Kazimir Malevich, a prominent painter. Yeah, he was born in Ukraine, and he said in his memories that I'm Ukrainian. And last but not least, it's about stereotype about Ukrainian nationalism and Nazism. And for me, it's it's very interesting situation, because today in Ukraine, among Ukrainian people, among even in Ukraine army, a lot of people with a different origin, different background, fight against Russian occupation. In Ukraine parliament, we have the different people with different backgrounds also. I'm not ethnic Ukraine. I'm Crimean Tatar. I'm Muslim, and it's my country, and we are fight to our for our country and for our identity as whole. But Russia and Russian propaganda try to show that all of us are nationalists, etc., etc., etc. That's why it's just a few examples how it works and why we should talk more about Ukraine and about Ukraine culture and identity today. Thank you.
Do you have any more questions? I have two questions that I want to give to the table. The first one, there is difference in the survey data on internal variations in Ukraine. People from the left, from the west are more against or more against concessions than people from the east. There is any difference that you can find about, even if you, I don't know if you have the question that if you do the concessions of the east of Ukraine is different than if you do the concessions about Crimea. There is such kind of variation that you could explore on the data. And what are the perspectives, and as a second question, are the perspectives of the election calendar for having elections during the war? Are the prospect for that?
Let me start from the second question, because it's very simple. According to the constitution of Ukraine, during the war, and during the martial law, the elections are prohibited. So it means that the current parliament, which was elected in 2019, will work until the end of war. When the war ends, I think there will be a separate legislation, because to make a new to install a new date for the elections. Because if it were not for the war, the elections would happen. The parliamentary elections would happen next autumn, and presidential elections should have happened next year in the spring. But since Constitution prohibits directly, so it's a direct provision of the Constitution that in the times of war, in case of big emergency like natural disaster or man-made disaster, which affects all the country, neither elections of the president, nor election of the parliament, nor election of the local councils and mayors are not held until the causes of these emergencies are removed. In our case, the cause of emergency is Russian aggression. So only after the Russian emergency will be removed, there will be presidential and parliamentary elections. Until that time, the democratically elected President Zelensky remains the president and remains and continues to act. And he continues to act not as a limited, not with the limited powers, but it continues to work as the president with full power. So this is prescribed. This is written in Constitution. The same is with the parliament. The parliamentary powers are not limited. So the parliament is independent of the executive power. It continues their plenary hearings and votings. However, what has changed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion is that the plenary meetings are secretly planned because our intelligence had information that the Ukrainian parliament, a Ukrainian president, have become a priority targets. And in May this year, the Russians tried to hit the presidential administrations, and they tried to hit the Ukrainian parliament with the aeroballistic missiles, right? The hypersonic missiles Kinzhal, which fortunately were destroyed by the Patriot system. So, but that was the plan, to hit the parliament or hit the presidential administration in order to remove the Ukrainian leadership. Speaking about the first question, you said between 2014, when the Russian aggression actually started and when Russians occupied Crimea, and 2022, there were differences between the southern eastern regions of the country on the one hand, and the central and western regions of the country on the other. So in the eastern and in the southern regions, there were more people, again, between 2014 and 2022, more people who believed that accepting Russian demands would reduce or even remove the threat of the war. However, when Russia started the full-scale invasion, you just need to understand that the Russian missiles, the Russian artillery, Russian airstrikes, they destroyed most of the eastern parts of the country. So the second largest city in Ukraine, like Kharkiv city, which is the second largest, I guess the São Paulo is the second largest city too, right? The first one. So it's like a Rio. So you can imagine that the city, like your second largest city, is besieged, and the people in this city, they were like a big share of these people were more favorable towards the invading power. But when Russia invaded, and it committed numerous war crimes, and that completely changed the perception of the people. We conducted focus groups in addition to the opinion polls, and what we have seen that was a very dramatic change in the opinion of the people. So it was like the curtain fall, and they saw with their own eyes that Russia was not a brotherly nation, that it's not a friendly neighbor, that it's an aggressor state, and that's what it brings is only destruction and pain. And after that, we conducted polls beginning from May last year and until September this year. We also conducted poll specifically in the city of Kharkiv, which is the most the eastern part of the country. And we conducted a separate poll in Odessa. Maybe you heard, this is the biggest port of Ukraine. And majority of the people more than 60% of the people, they are totally, completely against, and another up to 15%, they are somewhat against the concessions to Russia. So from this point of view, people who live in the eastern and southern part of the country, who suffered from the outcomes of the Russian aggression, now they have the same opinion about Russia. So no concessions, and continue defend the country until the victory, as the people from other parts of the country. So in effect, the Russian aggression, it has not divided, but it brought a new sense of national unity. And it's not something situational. This is a long-term trend. This national unity and let's say a complete detachment and alienation toward the neighboring country, toward Russia.
Yeah, I also want to say about national unity, and from the February 2022, Ukrainian society divided into two large groups. First group who in Ukraine army, and the second group is people who volunteering and help Ukraine army. We haven't any another choice to fight for our future. And if you talk about the people of occupied territories in Donetsk, Lugansk regions, or Crimea, also temporary occupied territories, what we see is there, it's a growing resistance of the people. And during last 9.5 years, a lot of new grassroots initiatives were established in these territories. And for today, we have a grassroots movement, pro-Ukraine movement in Crimea, for example, who gives a lot of information, of course, on the ground about the situation of the human rights violations in Crimea, but also makes a pro-Ukraine actions in Crimea and in other parts of temporary occupied territories of Ukraine. And it's important to understand that a lot of Ukrainian citizens really waiting for the occupation of our territories and under the occupation now.
So thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Alin. I've got this question from the YouTube chat. Só a pergunta é a seguinte: e como vocês veem o papel do Brasil? Tanto, eu traduzo por aqui, tranquilo. Como vocês veriam o papel do Brasil, tanto nesse conflito, tanto o papel do governo quanto o papel do povo brasileiro, da população? So the question is, what's the Brazilian role in the conflict concerning the government, but also the people, the Brazilians? Thank you.
Let me begin with the people. Just for you to know, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, for numerous times I was contacted by the journalist of Guerra Brasileiro, and he asked many questions about the conflict. And what I saw from these conversations, and that there is on a level of the people who are interested in, because of their profession, who are interested in international politics, that they understand that what happens to Ukraine is completely wrong. That what we also heard about the stories that there are people who are coming from Latin America, from Brazil, to help Ukrainians, because they think that it's very human to help those who suffer from the unprecedented aggression. And this is also, I think, supported by the poll which I presented, that almost a third of the people polled in Brazil, they are strongly support the statement that the Brazilian government should help Ukraine. And it's not about, I think it's not about taking sides. It's not about that the Brazilian government should be strongly on the side of Ukraine or strongly on the side of side of Russia. I think it's very simple. You either stand on the side of the international law, on the side of the principle that all the differences between the countries and the societies should be resolved in a peaceful manner, that the sufferings and the war crimes are unacceptable. That means that if you are standing on this side, you are you are just following your civic and human duty. So that's what I think about the society. So from what I know is that a lot of people from the countries, not only from Brazil but from Latin America, they came to Ukraine as volunteers to help Ukrainians to cope with all the difficulties. And first of all, I'm speaking about civilian volunteers who help the people in need. As the second point about the Brazilian government, what we saw is that on the international arena in the United Nations General Assembly, the Brazil most of the time votes in favor of the resolutions which support Ukrainian sovereignty, which condemn Russian aggression. There was only, I think, once when Brazil abstained, and that was a resolution about the reparations paid by Russia after the war. So I think that this is an issue, and here I think there are ways for improvement of the Brazilian position. Because let me take an example from the simple life. So if somebody like a robber who invades, who breaks down into your home and destroys your property, and he is caught, and then you heard from the law enforcement that this person would not compensate, right? Despite the fact that this person is very rich and has money to be compensated. But no, he won't compensate. I think that from this point of view, it's unfair that the perpetrator, the criminal, has the right or has the opportunity not to pay for what he has done. I think here, if we strictly adhere to the international law, we should recognize that when the Russia broke international law and committed the worst crime of aggression, the crime which is prohibited by the United Nations Charter. This is the biggest crime against international law and peace, the crime of aggression. By this act, Russia put itself outside of the international law. So right now, Russia is not protected by the international law, and Russian property and Russian foreign assets are also not protected. So from this point of view, it's completely legal and justifiable that Russians' assets, and we speak about $300 billion frozen of the assets abroad, should be given to Ukraine to compensate for all of the damages. And from this point of view, I think that what Brazilian government can do is to play an important role in establishing the framework, the legal framework for such action, because I believe that this cannot be done by the unilateral decisions only by the Western countries. There should be a broad consensus of all the countries which supported Ukraine. And just to finish that, more than 140 countries in General Assembly supported Ukraine's sovereignty and condemned Russian aggression. So I think these all countries, especially Brazil, which plays a very important role in Latin America, can be a leader inside Latin America as a country which drives the issue of legal, just framework for compensation of the damages done to Ukraine.
Unfortunately, during the last 30 years after the Ukrainian independence, a lot of issues about Ukraine comes through the Russian optics. And now is the time to strengthen connection between our societies, strengthen connection between civil society, Ukraine civil society, and Brazilian civil society, between Ukraine universities, artists, think tanks, and Brazilian. And it's the main goal to talk about Ukraine, to give more information about Ukraine, about the situation in Ukraine, about our views and vision of the future to Brazilian society, and also to open for Ukrainians Brazilian culture, Brazilian identity, and Brazilian view. Thank you.
I have one more question to see what you think about how the Middle East conflict can affect the way that Ukraine is being able to resist to the Russian aggression, how it can reduce the support of the United States and European countries to the Ukraine effort.
Thank you for this question. Just I will start with the simple fact. I think that it will be interesting for our audience to know that Ukraine is the only country where we have a president of the Jewish descent, of the Jewish origin, and the Minister of Finance, who is the Muslim and Crimean Tatar.
Defense.
Minister of Defense, right. The Minister of Defense is Crimean Tatar Muslim. Mm-hmm. So, and they work together in one team. And the example of Ukraine shows that that despite the different worldviews, despite the different religious views, people can work together. So, and why it happened? And here is I'm coming to answering the question. This happened because for centuries, in Ukraine, people of different ethnicity, of different religious views, they lived generally in the peace. The only occasions when people of different religions started to attack and oppress people of other religions was under the influence of the Russian Empire. In the Russian times, the Russian emperors they used manipulation in order to make Jews enemies of all other peoples. They wanted and they suppressed Muslims again, mainly, and they tried even to convert Muslims into Christianity. So, and that was done by the force. That was during the during the Russian imperial times and during the Russian Soviet times. But on an ordinary level, on a grassroots level, the people, as I said, of different nationalities and religions in Ukraine, they for centuries lived peacefully, and this is the big legacy. This is the big legacy. So, if people for decades or for centuries live peacefully together, it's very hard for politicians to make them enemies. And here we come to the very difficult issue of how the crisis in the Middle East will influence. I think that there are unbridgeable differences between the Jewish state and Palestinians and the Arab countries. But at the same time, all of the if this war continues, what does it mean? It will mean that the oil prices will grow because of the war, and the prices and the living costs will grow, and it will impact all the countries in the world. So, from this point of view, what Ukraine is doing and what all the countries should do, and what like Brazil should do, that we should bring together this issue to the United Nations, and to decide that the war as such should be prohibited. That the nuclear arms should be prohibited. If it's not done, these wars will continue to happen again and again. If we speak about, this is the major thing, how the conflict in the Middle East can influence not only Ukraine, but the whole mankind. Thank you.
So, Doesn't we have any more questions? Or so it was very, very good to hear from you in this morning. We learned a lot about what's happening right now in Ukraine. Agradeço também para os que estão aqui presentes e também os que nos assistiram no YouTube aí a palestra, né? Aprendemos muito aí sobre o que vem acontecendo na Ucrânia nesta manhã. E o vídeo ficará guardado no YouTube também para quem quiser ver em outros momentos. Muito obrigado. Agradeço novamente ao Caio e aos professores que aqui apresentaram.
Muito obrigado, Ivan. Muito obrigado a todos.
Muito obrigado.